Thank you, John, for that wonderful introduction. I'm so excited to be here today. Many friends in the audience, of course, my friend John Paul, and I did not pay him to give me that plug for chair, but I appreciate the affection, of course, and the vote of confidence. My friend
We want to
Arthur.
win again.
Exactly. We are going to win again,
Yes,
that's
sir.
for sure.
Yes.
And we have a lot of work to do, but ladies and gentlemen, to take back our state and also to reform our party. That's very, very important. We need to congratulate so many great people in this community. Of course, the organizers behind this CRA chapter for doing excellent work in the Torrance, Lomita, Palos, Verdes area. Today is Sunday. Like a good Catholic, I don't usually sign up for speaking engagements on a day like today, but I really made an exception for this organization because I want to come to you with a dose of optimism about the 2026 election cycle. It's very important, ladies and gentlemen, that we remain focused on victory in 2026. And I know that it can be a little disillusioning when you read the newspapers, when you reflect on the most recent election cycle for Proposition 50, and I'm going to talk about that here at the very outset. But as we get into 2026, I think it's proper to put everything in perspective and to really feel optimistic about our opportunity to take back this state and to present issues that resonate with ordinary people across all political parties. And so I'm going to make that case, and I'm going to reflect on my personal experience as a mayor, as a city council member in deep blue southeast Los Angeles County, where I was the only Republican elected official in a 7-city radius. Absolutely no Republican elected official north, south, east, west. I was it. For better or worse, I was the face of the Republican Party in Southeast Los Angeles County. And that was a very difficult proposition, I have to say. I do remember years ago, there was a vote on sanctuary city for a number of communities and municipalities throughout the state of California. And I remember reading about Aliso Viejo in Orange County, where a 5-0 vote, all Republican city council members with strong support from the people voted against Sanctuary City for their community. And that was received very heroically by all of the Republican coverage. And I remember thinking to myself, gosh, that would have been a real sweet situation for me. When the same issue presented itself in my city of Cudahy, 4 Democrats on that city council were taking that issue on against me as the lone Republican, and the mob of Antifa and Antifa affiliates at that city council ready to burn me in effigy. And I just remember reflecting that in a situation like that, it does really take a lot of courage to face that and vote with principle. So I want to share a little bit about that experience and again give you a dose of optimism going into the next election cycle. But let me at the very outset address Proposition 50. Because it just passed, unfortunately. Yeah. There are reasons why it passed that we can dissect here very briefly. The first is that the process was kind of rigged at the very outset in terms of getting it on the ballot. It was rammed through the state assembly, the state senate, with the governor's approbation at the very end of that process, and an attorney general that biased the description in favor of the proponents. So that already disadvantaged us out of the gate. Then the other important component was the funding behind the effort. $170 million was invested in Proposition 50 by the Democrats and their allies versus about $80 million invested collectively by all sources on the Republican side against that proposition. So we were outnumbered, we were out-financed, and of course the Democrats made this issue all about Donald Trump in a state where regrettably his approval rating is still underwater. And so the issue for Proposition 50 was President Trump, and $170 million was invested in that effort, and unfortunately that presented a complication on our side. However, going into 2026, ladies and gentlemen, the dynamic is very different. on the ballot is not President Trump. He will not be on the ballot. We're going to have a lot of good candidates up and down the state, and I think we've got an opportunity really to make a compelling case with ordinary people. And I want to reflect a little bit about my personal experience. I was born and raised in the city of Cudahy, about 10 miles southeast of downtown Los Angeles, a very troubled city in a very troubled region. For reference, the neighboring city is Bell, and some of you might remember the case of Bell about maybe 15 years ago. Corruption on steroids, where the city manager was paying himself $1.5 million a year in a town where the average income is $30,000. A really, really disgusting violation of the public trust. It was all over the news. My own town, a couple of years later, had the same episode of corruption. The dollar signs were smaller, but the conduct no less egregious. 2 council members were indicted in the city of Cudahy for bribery. They subsequently were sentenced to federal prison terms. One of the council members was involved in a 5-hour standoff with the FBI, barricaded himself, made for television kind of stuff. This was 2012. I had just relocated from New York City to my hometown, thinking very naively at the time that I would just pass through the family home for a couple of months until I figured out what cool hip part of the West Side I was going to move to, Marina del Rey or Santa Monica. But very providentially, a corruption scandal erupted in my city within a couple months of my relocation. And at that moment, I had to figure out how I was going to get myself involved to try to remediate the situation for my city. And I vowed that I would find a good city council candidate to run for office, and that I would not leave the city until I got that person elected. And so I looked for a good candidate, and I looked, and I looked. And when nobody halfway decent was stepping forward in this grave opportunity to take back the city, I had to look myself in the mirror and determine whether it was the right moment for me to step forward. And for many of us that have lives outside of politics, professional careers, family obligations, getting involved in politics comes with considerable self-sacrifice. It really does. Now, if you are corrupt, getting involved in politics can be a very lucrative proposition. Very lucrative. But for those of us that are honest, getting involved in politics really comes with a lot of sacrifice. In my case, I had to take into consideration my professional work. I was working for Union Bank at the time, a subsidiary of Bank of Tokyo. I had an opportunity to work abroad in Japan for the parent company. I mean, it would have presented a lot of really interesting opportunities for me professionally. And so when I make a decision to get involved in politics and stay local, in my case, it really did come with a lot of sacrifice. But I had to pray about it. I had to look myself in the mirror and really figure out whether it was the moment for me to step up to the plate and defend my constituents against a corrupt political establishment that had been afflicting that entire region. And so I prayed about it. I decided to run for city council. In 2013, I was elected overwhelmingly. And I was immediately appointed unanimously by my colleagues on the city council as mayor. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it was baptism through fire. We absolutely fired everyone. The city manager, the finance director, the community services director, and we rebuilt the city from scratch. I knew that we needed to rebuild public trust, and that meant really cleaning house. And so we brought in a new staff. Most of us on the city council were new, and so we had to really dive in. And many of the folks in this room that are experienced city council members know that it sometimes takes multiple terms before you become very seasoned and are able to really affect important change in the community. But in my case, I had no time to waste. Within months, I had to act very decisively and very quickly. And the first issue that I tackled, and this is going to be important because I'm going to be touching on themes that I think will resonate in 2026. Now, in my community, I was the only Republican elected official. The demographics of the city, 98% Hispanic, 80% Democrat, only 7% Republican. Okay, so the odds were stacked against me ideologically, but I had a lot of success in that city, and I'm going to share why. And the themes that I'm going to bring up in terms of issues, I think are totally transferable to the 2026 election cycle. These are issues, in my estimation, that are the lowest hanging fruit for bringing Democrats and ordinary people over to our side because we have the moral high ground on these particular issues. Now, these are not the only issues, and they may not even be the most important issues for saving our democracy and our country and our culture over the next generations. But I'm going to bring these issues up, and there are 4 in particular that I want to highlight as just examples of low-hanging fruit. This is easy stuff, ladies and gentlemen, for bringing Democrats over to our side with minimal effort. The first out of the gate for me was taking on government corruption. And I have to tell you, being a Republican in Southeast Los Angeles County was liberating, because I had no ring to kiss. That's very enlightening and very liberating, ladies and gentlemen. And right out of the gate, I called upon the California State Controller, John Chung at the time, who was running for governor of California on the Democratic side, and I demanded a forensic examination of my city's financial accounts. John Chung ignored me, because Cudahy isn't even on the map. He was going after bigger fish in preparation for his gubernatorial race. And so I decided to go to the Los Angeles Times, and I presented to the LA Times a 10-page summary of findings. I'm a CPA, I know how to audit government agencies, and so I did my own investigation of the city's accounts right away. And I came up with a 10-page summary of findings that I presented to the controller. He ignored me. I went to the LA Times. They published an article, one of the few favorable articles about a Republican elected official. Wow. And I got to tell you, after they published it, the controller came knocking on the door and finally delivered a very consequential forensic examination that validated almost all of my findings. I'll give you one example of just how egregious the internal control deficiencies were in the city. We were paying a lobbying firm a retainer, which means that we pay them regardless of the work that they do. This was the contractual arrangement that previous city council members had approved. And so the amounts are not that important, because it's the principle behind this that I really want to highlight. But we were paying this firm a small amount every single month. And I remember asking the professional staff in the city, what does this company do for us exactly? And I remember the old city manager telling me, you know, Jack, I really don't know what they do for us. And then I remember asking another senior staff member in the city, what does this company do for the city exactly? You know, Jack, I really don't know. I seem to remember vaguely they did something for us years ago. Well, after further investigation, I realized that about 5 years earlier, they had done an engagement for the city in Sacramento, and then we just lost contact, and they were continuing to charge the city on a monthly retainer every month. It reminded me of that old movie Office Space, if many of you remember that movie, with the one gentleman working in the basement who had been fired like years earlier, but through a glitch in the payroll system was still coming up to and showing up to work. And so it reminded me of that scenario. And so of course we identified that as a deficiency, and we were able to get rid of that contract. But that's just one example of a crooked contract. We had a trash company agreement that had an evergreen clause. Some of you may have heard of that concept of evergreen. What it means is that the contract renews automatically. Okay, every year it renewed automatically. So it was a 10-year contract, but the following year, that 10-year period would reset so that it became a perpetual 10-year contract forever. Egregious term. And again, that's another example of something we were able to remediate right away. But examples of this kind of mismanagement permeated the city, and I wanted the California State Controller to come in and really provide an independent corroboration of these findings. And so when he finally did and issued a report, which you can still Google to this day, is probably a good idea if you're interested in government, because it'll present to you examples of what not to do. And I was able to usher in the greatest government reform measures in my city's history. So that's issue number one that I'm very, very proud of, ladies and gentlemen. And I got to tell you as well, we did so many things like lowering the discretionary spending limit of the city manager. We implemented term limits. Like, these are solutions that may not be applicable everywhere all the time, but in my city's case, we needed to be bold with a lot of our proposals because we needed to rebuild public trust. So issue number one is fighting government corruption. That is a winning issue for Republicans. I'm telling you across the board that if you look at the Southeast Corridor, basically all of the little cities along the 710 freeway, afflicted with corruption, beginning with Bell all the way down to Huntington Park, Cudahy, Southgate, all of those cities, mired in corruption. And the people, mostly Democrats, are yearning for a change. And I presented an example of that change. And so I was very proud of representing my constituents in that capacity. Issue number 2 that worked so easily for me was taking on public education, the corrupt public education establishment. Now for me, this issue was exceptionally personal because I went to a failure factory public school. I'm a survivor of the public school education system. It is really only through the grace of God that I was able to escape a deficient public education system and go on to Harvard and Stanford. I really ascribe it really through the grace of God. When I was 14 years old, I had to enroll at the local community college by night because my high school education was so deficient. When I was 15 years old, a sophomore in high school, I enrolled at Cal State LA by evening so that I could take math classes and social science classes because my high school had no opportunities for me. This is the era before charter schools. We did have some magnet schools in the Los Angeles Unified School District, but they were not practical options for me because they were significantly remote, and my parents also very uneducated, unfortunately for their background. So they were not able to really assist me with my academic endeavors. So on my own, unilaterally, I had to enroll at the local colleges just to supplement my high school education. So I am very committed to education reform. I think many of the children in that particular part of Los Angeles County are robbed of a proper education. And so in my first mayoral term, we were presented with a crisis in the local public schools. 75% failure rate in the examinations. The kids could not read, write, or perform basic arithmetic at grade level in the elementary schools, and those standards are already low to begin with. That is the racism of low expectations in a Hispanic community. And so the parents started to complain. They came to me for help. And let me tell you, when I decided to get involved, the political establishment in the area told me to stay away from that issue. They said to me, "Jack, you are not a school board member. Hands off the schools." But I remember telling them, even though it's not within my formal jurisdiction, it was certainly within my moral obligation to get involved. So I tell you what I did. I held public hearings on the quality of education in a city council proceeding, replete with people testifying at the microphone. I had teachers, parents, students come up and explain their experience. I drafted a resolution as a mayor in the city council proceeding to condemn the local public schools as failure factories. And that effort, even though non-binding, again, I was a mayor, I was not a school board president, I had zero authority over the schools. But that didn't stop me from putting a spotlight on the crisis. And that effort led to the Los Angeles Unified School District summoning the board members to their headquarters in downtown Los Angeles. We met at the boardroom, I pled my case, and within a few days, the entire administration of one of those corrupt elementary schools was removed. And I am very proud of that, ladies and gentlemen. And again, this is in a town that was 98% Hispanic, 80% Democrat. When government goes after the quality of education for children, let me tell you, Democrat or Republican, parents will organize against that kind of abuse. And in my city's case, I was able to get mostly Democrat parents to champion education reform. Now, this was 10 years ago. Imagine the crisis today, because not only do we have inadequate academic expectations, but we also have a woke agenda that is trying to sexualize and pervert the education of children. Yes. So that is an even easier proposition to get Democratic parents over to our side. And let me tell you, in all of my years of public service in the city of Cudahy, which is a mostly Democratic city, never once, I'm telling you the truth, never once did I meet a parent who was in favor of sexualizing kindergartners. Not a single parent. And so that is, broadly speaking, issue number 2 that I think is low-hanging fruit for Republicans. We and only Republicans have the moral high ground on education reform. The Democrats do not. The state assemblyman at the time, a fellow named Ricardo Lara, some of you might be acquainted with this gentleman. He's now the insurance commissioner in the state of California. He came to my city in kind of his routine propaganda presentations and spoke about the economy. And he spoke about how the Republicans were the party of the rich. And it was very interesting to me at the time how he stayed away from his role in changing public education. Yes. I believe at the time he was trying to push the reform of the curriculum for children so that we could promote LGBT agenda and talk about how George Washington struggled with his sexuality. Whatever the case may be, you know, that is irrelevant to the founding of this country. And so the issues today, ladies and gentlemen, are so critical for reform. And dare I say, education is the next civil rights issue of our day, and it is the issue over which Republicans have the moral high ground, and it will be the easiest, lowest hanging fruit issue for bringing Democrats over to our side. So issue number 2, education reform. The third issue that I faced early in my tenure as a mayor and a city council member was excessive taxation by a city council that was interested in squeezing as much money from the people as possible. Every election cycle, every 2 years, the council majority, all Democrats at this point, wanted to push parcel tax measures, sales tax measures. Every time they would vote, it would get on the ballot, and every time I would write the argument against that measure, and I would organize the people of Cudahy to fight egregious taxation. And let me tell you, in a town that is the bluest of the bluest region, in the bluest state of the union, they voted 75% against these tax measures, which to me is amazing. Don't let anybody tell you that Democratic families love government when it goes after their wallet so gallingly. If you stand up against corrupt government, you will get people to come over to our side. It's that easy, ladies and gentlemen. I was so successful at repelling tax measures in my city that I started helping the neighboring cities. And so the case of Bell, which by the way has one of the highest property tax rates in the entire county of Los Angeles, higher than Beverly Hills. Okay, and this is a working class town. So the city council in Bell wanted to push even more taxes. So they put a parcel tax, they put a sales tax measure. I organized with the residents of the neighboring city to put an argument on the ballot against that measure and to campaign against those taxes. And let me tell you, again, those taxes failed to pass in the neighboring city. And to this day, all of the city council members in the city of Bell have unfriended me from Facebook, and they refuse to talk to me because I helped derail their tax measure. And I'm pretty proud of that. I subsequently helped communities in Linwood as well to organize against tax measures. I now live in Riverside County, and I worked most recently with the city of Murrieta to fight an egregious bond measure for the school district. And again, we were successful at derailing that. And so I'm not a big fan of taxation. Now, I do recognize that on some occasions, there is a compelling proposition that can be made in theory to shore up funds for compelling projects in the city. But the bar is very, very high, ladies and gentlemen. And most public agencies fall far short of that responsibility. And in particular, the city of Cudahy and the neighboring cities were totally irresponsible in this respect. And I was able to organize the people against these measures. So that is low-hanging fruit issue number 3, fighting taxation measures. The fourth issue I want to highlight that I had exceptional success over was public safety. This is foundational. You might recall Proposition 36 in the 2024 general election. That was the one issue that passed overwhelmingly. Almost 2/3 of the voters wanted to improve public safety by championing more appropriate penalties for drug abuse and theft, very common sense proposals, and 2/3 of the state of California voted for public safety. Think about that for a moment. You had to have had crossover from Democrats to have Proposition 36 pass by a margin that wide. And in my city's case, I remember on one occasion the LA County Sheriff's Department, to which we had outsourced for public safety, came to us with a very substantial increase in their fees. I seem to recall it might have been like 15%, just 1 year over the next. And I remember being taken aback by that significant increase in the rate. So I called the captain for a meeting, and I wanted to really understand the allocation of resources to my city. And what I understood was that the number of patrol units was pretty much constant throughout the 24/7 cycle. So across all of the shifts, we had the same number of patrols in the city. And what I observed coming home late at night on occasion is that on a Wednesday evening at 1 in the morning, there was really not a lot of activity going on. It's no wonder that I saw a lot of sheriff patrol units congregated at 7-Eleven, because there just wasn't really a whole lot going on. By contrast, Saturdays, Friday nights, the sheriff's department was stressed with the number of calls. And so it just appeared to me very sensible to reallocate resources. You don't have to have a constant distribution of patrol units for every single shift. You can allocate more resources when the need is there, and you can remove some of the resources when the need is not there. And so what I did is I called upon the sheriff's department to give me raw data of incidents by geography within the city. And I performed my own analytical review of that data and presented with the sheriff's department with an opportunity to reallocate resources and, in fact, increase the coverage for public safety. I made the case before the city council, and I secured the approbation of the people, and that was not even controversial, ladies and gentlemen. We were able to enhance public safety in our community, and it was a simple fix, and it was overwhelmingly popular in my city. So that final issue I'm going to highlight is public safety. It is a winning issue for us as Republicans. And so when you look at those examples, okay, think again about the demographics in my city. 98% Hispanic, mostly Spanish speaking, over 80% Democrat. And across each of these issues, I had remarkable success. A lot of people will sometimes ask me, Jack, how did you pull that off? How were you able to be so successful with ordinances and legislation in a community that was overwhelmingly Democrat, and in a city council dynamic that was stacked against you? And the answer was twofold. Number one, I exposed the truth. That's half the battle, ladies and gentlemen. When you put a spotlight on issues and you shame the other side into doing the right thing, that's half the battle, ladies and gentlemen. And so the first strategy that I employed out of the gate was telling the truth and exposing the reality, the cold reality. And it was something I took very seriously. The council at one point started to limit my ability to speak. So think about this, what they would do. They would call on me on every issue to speak first, and then they would go down the remaining 4 council members to speak. And then when I wanted to rebut an argument, they would not call on me. They would call the question. And so it was very clever, because they only gave me 3 minutes on every issue to speak. And I couldn't rebut any argument from the remaining council members. So I started to get creative. I started to put a public speaker card as a member of the public. And so when it was my turn to speak, I would walk down from the dais all the way to the front, to the public podium, and I would speak to the council as a member of the public. And that gave me an extra 3 minutes. And so I took advantage of that. You have to get creative. You have to get creative. So the first strategy was putting a spotlight on the truth. And the second was to rally support from the community. It's amazing, by the way, how cowardly a lot of elected officials are when they're facing a commentary from the people. I'm telling you the truth. Sometimes elected officials in the dais will cower when people from the community go up to the microphone, point their finger, and shame them for their conduct. That carries a lot of weight. And so there have been a lot of examples that I can recall in the city of Cudahy where the council members were on the brink of something egregious, and we were able to shame them into doing the right thing, and in most cases they cowered. Now, that strategy on the reverse did not work on me. There were a number of occasions where people came up to the microphone. I remember there was a case of a charter school approval. Now, cities don't approve charters for charter schools, but we had a land use issue because a charter school that had been approved wanted to come into the city and develop their school in a plot of land that they had purchased. And so that was the issue before the council. And I supported that, but I had people, nasty people from the other side that wanted to subvert alternative education for struggling children because they were basically in cahoots with the local unions. And so they came up to the microphone and they threatened me. They said, if you vote for this, we're going to go after your work, we're going to go after your family, we're going to make your life miserable. And they thought that that tactic would work with me. And so I knew it was going to be difficult. I knew that people were going to come to my house and protest with a bullhorn, but I had to do the right thing because I took an oath to the Constitution and to defend and support the interests of my constituents. And so I did the right thing, ladies and gentlemen, and I voted the way that my constituents would benefit from the vote. And I got to tell you, it wasn't easy. There were times late at night when I thought for a moment whether it was all worth it. I remember my father at the time was thinking, you know, Jack, maybe you should just resign. You know, it's just not worth it. And I have to admit, for a second, I did think about it for a second. And then I realized that if I did that, the other side would win on their terms. And I vowed that I would never let them get away with that. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the message that I'm presenting to you today is that with a little bit of courage, with a little bit of pushing the envelope, and with coalescing around very easy issues to bring ordinary people to our side, we can save our state and we can help rescue our country. God bless you all, and God bless the United States of America.